We've we've been reading every day for our after the breakfast is taken. Then we come in for our little work meeting. People are assigned various tasks, and I was talking with Vivian before we got underway tonight about all of the work that gets done here. Kutis seem to be constantly in need of some kind of repair, or at least this time of year. This is the time of the year when things are done, and kutis have been infiltrated by various rodents, and they make a mess, and they produce a lot of smell over their time of their occupancy, of course, and so that has to be attended to, and it can be very difficult to do so. So our work monk is always very vigilant and on this and many other scores, and then the resident community gets to see what they know about taking drywall down from walls, or stripping them bare of old insulation, or putting drywall back up, and plastering and sanding and priming and painting and so on and so forth. So it's quite an adventure. I keep comparing it to how things are done in Thailand, which is depending on the state of a kuti and how simple it is, it just gets rebuilt because it's just made out of bamboo, maybe. Or it doesn't have insulation because it's just made out of brick. And so, but things still get in, like lizards and snakes and other things tend to get into some of the kutis, and so you have to keep your wits about you for sure. So something about monastic life and dealing with little creatures that seems to be a constant so far as I can see. Anyway, we always read because we don't want to end these sessions in the morning after breakfast. We don't want to end them with just thought of smelly insulation. And so usually there's a reading of some kind. And now we're reading from a little book of little sayings, aphorisms, little quotations from Ajahn Chah. Some of them are just a single line in length, and some of them a little bit longer, but he was never at a loss for words when it comes to Dhamma. He was a true teacher who seemed to have a very good grasp of the audience before him, and their need, their sincerity, their commitment, and so forth. And he could give very, very clear statements and teachings. He could give very elusive ones. He was fond of simile, rather like the Buddha. So he took delight in that ancient form of teaching idiom. And Ajahn Chah was a very lively teacher, as probably many or most of you know from reading excerpts here and there. So this morning I got to read them because Lumpur was busy elsewhere, other commitments, and I think the first of one of the readings that I read from had to do with the attitude that we bring to listening to Dhamma, which is for one thing not being concerned with remembering every point that was made, and kind of either literally taking note on a piece of paper we have on our lap, or trying to, as good students do in classrooms all over the world, all the livelong day, try to take note of every point and be able to keep a mental note of that. Well, in time for you maybe to return to your room and jot them down, I'm not sure. But no, so not to be diligent in that way, but be diligent in another way, which is to relax, as we've been doing in our meditation, and pay attention. Of course, we've just been training in mindfulness once again. So to pay attention, to bring the heart to the exercise of listening, so that there is an openness to what's being spoken. And then have faith, have trust in the fact that points that may be brought up in a particular talk which are pertinent for in your situation will somehow register so that they will arise again, maybe in an appropriate time, or will continue to some extent to reverberate for the next little while, or maybe even the next day after a talk. So this is good for all of us who from time to time, and maybe quite often, are listening to Dhamma. Not so much to be concerned about every single point, but to be concerned with a type of openness, readiness, preparedness, so that the heart can absorb what it needs to from the reflections given. And I think one of the readings was also advice when giving a Dhamma talk too, and so Ajahn Chah was not a fan of monks who prepared in advance and jotted down long points, keeping everything in mind, and basically composing their Dhamma talks. That was not by any stretch of the imagination the way at Wat Pah Pong when he was abbot, and I still think it is not to this day. So there is a kind of spontaneous quality to the talks. I don't understand Thai nearly well enough to be able to speak from experience with having sat through hours of talks at Wat Pah Pong and elsewhere, but still I trust that the monks who are sitting and giving them are not kind of reading off a mental list of everything that they had planned in advance. Even so, some kind of, and maybe it's natural that prior to knowing that you're giving a talk like I have today, then the mind returns again. And usually because I'm in the way of a great deal of my experience, a great deal of the time, usually the preparation has to do with getting out of the way, remembering or finding yet again that way of getting out of the way. And sometimes it feels like you have a home, and you're driving in your car, you're the operator of your little car or your bicycle or whatever. You have a home and you're on the road to your home, and yet every time it seems like the actual road to your home is a little different. Is it this left turn up here around the corner? Is it the right turn after that big tree? Or it seems to change a little each time. So I don't yet have a surefire way of finding my way home so that I can speak with just some degree of confidence and ease, or at least because I'm not particularly nervous now, at least thinking in the early, well prior of a talk, I haven't yet discovered that is always something I don't even need to think about. Maybe I should try that sometime. Yeah. It's I think this is one of the reasons why I'm thinking of Lumpur Samedo. We often play one of his very recent talks on the lunar occasions, because we're in the happy situation now with him in England that they're 5 hours ahead of us, and so very often we actually receive the talk he gave that day at Amaravati. We're able to play it that evening here in Tisarana, so it's quite a delight. And you know very well that he just sits down and begins to speak again. And as he often admits, I've been speaking about the same thing for 40 years. And yet there's always something fresh in it. And he'll return to the same stories very often, or you can anticipate where he's going, and yet something new will emerge from it, because there's a sense of exploration. And maybe he has, I'm sure, in fact, he does have a much better, keener sense of home, where home is. And he knows very well that whether he's in that car or on that bicycle, he's going to find it. It's really not a problem because he's been there so many times. So, yeah. So, oh, I've forgotten. How long are these talks so to be again? Is it half an hour? Or
It's really up to you, Ajahn.
Great.
You can talk. Well, I mean, we finish at 9:30, and it's nice to have some questions, but you can have more or less questions, whatever is.
Well, if I keep rambling like I am now, I mean, who knows when we'll end? So I better get started. And Lumpur and I were talking, I guess, just yesterday about about sports, because you can't avoid seeing a bit of news and this or that happens, and then and of course we've all watched a bit of sports over the years, and so. And there's something curious about sporting events, sporting occasions, the sporting contests, of course. They bring out some pretty elements of competition can be quite actually rather distasteful if you think of the extremes of hockey or football or things like that. And yet those sports and track and field and tennis, doesn't matter what you're thinking about, there are things that there are qualities to the sporting event that I think draws people's attention. Many people, anyway. Not everyone is at all interested, but there's discipline, there's effort, there's that discipline and effort, and people giving their whole heart to something. It might be putting a goofy little white ball into a little cup in the middle of a lot of grass, which does seem like a very odd thing. I mean, you can reduce any sport to something kind of nonsensical or humorous, or it's pretty easy to speak with sarcasm about any kind of sport, of course, and the kind of seriousness with which people take it. But on the other hand, there is often there are things that are well worth observing and taking to heart. And we do see, after all, courage. And I've mentioned discipline because we know that in any of the sports that we think are worth watching, which is, the best of them on television, I mean, roving TV cameras aren't always on the ball, and grade 4 schoolyards to see young Johnny or Susie kick a ball or something. I mean, we don't spend too much time watching grade 4 and grade 9 sporting events, but we do watch these professional events, and we see we see people doing things probably none of us have ever been able to do, not that well at least. We've played tennis, but we haven't done whatever Roger Federer can do with a tennis ball, for instance. So there's an accentuation of skill, which is almost at times unbelievable. I was recounting watching this soccer player, Lionel Messi, score a corner from the corner. So that's on the goal line. So he swung the ball right around, and the ball ended up in the far corner of the goal. And one of the monks who heard the story looked at me and said, "Is that legal?" It is legal. It's just really improbable, and I doubt that any of us, even if we were inclined, were ever able to do that particular little had the knack with the ball. Anyway, okay, so here I am rambling. I mean, this could take a while this evening. I hope you're all comfortable. But so it reminded me of something I remember seeing in the news. Ooh, it was maybe 8 years ago, something like that. It was the report of a Boston Marathon, okay? And the previous winner, some of you might be runners or know all about these kinds of things, but I think the previous year the winner had been a South African runner, and he was, I think, winning through, or ahead through much of the Boston Marathon, this race. But there was a great runner behind him, and probably it was Kenyan, I'm not sure, but he was African for sure. And anyway, very, very successful and remarkable runner. And everyone knew that he had the kind of qualities that would could into the final few yards and into the winning. And sure enough, he just kept. He was behind. I don't know. These are odd races where the second place person can be hundreds and hundreds of meters behind. But slowly over the last few miles, he just kept coming up and up and up and up. And it turned into basically a foot race. I mean, literally a sprint after 26 odd miles, turned into a sprint in the last 200 or 400 meters. And this Kenyan, or whoever it was, ended up winning. So you can imagine this is 2 hours, 10, 15 minutes, whatever the time was that for that particular race. But it's a pace that very, very few people in the world could ever keep up with. And yet they continued, and there was a race, and it came down to the last 200 meters or something. My recollection of the actual events aren't so clear, as you can tell. Anyway, the most striking thing for me in the end, and I could sort of visualize this great race, kind of nobility, that continuity, where there's a huge amount of effort, but you know a bit about running, know that you have to be relaxed in a certain way, otherwise for instance the breathing tight up. And I've often seen them zeroing in on the of runners, sprinters, and distance runners, and if the feet relax, that's a very good sign apparently, and they can tell from the way the upper body is going and how the arms are moving and all these kinds of subtle things, because there's a science, I suppose, to these things like everything else. So after the race finished, okay, someone came up to the coach for the man who lost, okay, the second place runner, who was hoping to repeat for obvious reasons and had lost after this epic battle. It might have been the closest, at least, Boston Marathon ever run at that point, because there was maybe 2 seconds between them now. And they asked the coach for his, what's your response? And he said something like this. He said, "It was terrible, beautiful." And I actually, that response, it brought some tears to my eyes. I found that I found his response so beautiful, because there was something which transcended the race, just winning and losing. There was something in that kind of noble enterprise, especially in the last mile, half mile, a few hundred meters. There's something which elevated that particular event. You might say this stuff of legend or something. That amount of effort in that coming final. So it was terrible, but it was beautiful. And it brings me, of course, to the life and the practice in Dhamma. And we have the Buddha's assurance. He says the Dhamma is beautiful in the beginning. And if you think of your coming into practice and you're coming into an acquaintance with the Dhamma as a way of looking at the world, seeing the world, encountering the world of yourself and others, and engaging with your experience, it's quite eye-opening. It is quite beautiful. I can remember my very first retreat and having a really good meditation and realize what mindfulness was, and having, you know, as a young man, but I'd started meditating when I was about 15, I guess, and I'd never had anything like that. And I said, here's the point. Here's the point to my, and it was beautiful, you know, and that marked a kind of beginning for me. So encountering the Dhamma has this kind of beauty because it's always fresh. It's always a fresh way of looking at the world, understanding our experience, and engaging with our experience in a skillful enough way that our understanding of life deepens and broadens as we continue to live and practice. So it's a very beautiful thing. And it's beautiful in the middle. The Dhamma is beautiful in the middle. So this is where most of us find ourselves most of the time, I think, because we aren't always thinking about beginnings. The Buddha said it's beautiful in the middle. And I think about this foot race because there was a lot of effort here. And this was the culmination of who knows how many hundreds of hours of running and practice and you know, time sprints and who knows how many miles they run a day. And yet this was the expression of that discipline and training was brought to bear on this particular race. The middle can be difficult. It can be a struggle, and maybe we have to adjust somewhat the lens of our vision to see, to capture, to realize what's beautiful about the struggle in the middle. Because it isn't always just that fresh, brand new, novel insight. Oh, this is what mindfulness looks like. It will take on a different quality because it will be something that will come out of the midst of experience in the middle of experience that we seem to have experienced for years, maybe. In other words, it's in the middle of practice, which we are well acquainted, maybe too well acquainted with. And yet, for some reason, something can come freshly out of this moment too. And so Dhamma, when it's realized in this moment, and this moment, and this moment, in other words, in the moment, it's beautiful as well in the middle. And on reflection, maybe as that coach reflected in his kind of poetic succinctness, on reflection, there is a kind of beauty that we can attribute to our willingness to struggle, our willingness to endure sometimes. Back to Ajahn Chah, I mean, this was one of his main teachings, patient endurance, oton in Thai, oton. Being willing to endure what is not easy to endure. And sometimes being the willingness to do this arises from our having seen the beauty in it. There is a kind of, you know, the mind is constructing something here. We're in the act of interpretation, but this is how we come to understand things, and it can be very skillful, can it not? To understand things in a kindly way, and sometimes a kind and compassionate and a true way of interpreting our experience is to see that the struggles that we are willing to endure in life are in fact beautiful. We endure them sometimes, even though some things could be easier. Maybe it's easier to, every time you're frustrated, to get up, get in your car and go to a movie, or do something which is not skillful, maybe. And yet we continue, we invest again this precious energy that we have, and we return to the Dhamma. We make mistakes, we say the wrong things, we we lose the plot, yeah. but we bring attention back to to the path, to our aspirations, and we remind ourselves. We bring mindfulness to bear on the path itself. We remind ourselves of where the Dhamma lies again. We remind ourselves of our aspirations, and we get ourselves back onto the track. And it takes a lot of endurance. It takes a lot of willingness to fail, even in order to continue in this kind of way. So there is an inevitable struggle in life, because as well prepared as we think we are for this or that, life has a way of throwing spanners in the works, I think is one of the terms, isn't it? We can't anticipate what life has before us. One of my first teachers, Ajahn Sona, he would always talk about getting up in the morning and kind of practicing what he calls surprise meditation, which begins by reminding yourself that the universe is under no obligation to conform to your expectations. No obligation. People around you, the things around you, even your body, things will go otherwise. Things will happen which you don't anticipate. That's the way of things. And it's going to be a surprise. But to be angry or disappointed or basically surprised by being surprised, that's where we start. That's where we start getting off track again, and it takes effort to get back on track. But at least if we're prepared, in a funny kind of sense, sounds impossible in a way, but we do know that we can be in some way sort of prepared, because we're a little bit lighter on the feet. Maybe we're prepared to keep our balance or something like that, metaphorically speaking. But we learn to be a little better prepared for surprises, and that helps. Beauty in the end, of course. Well, this has to do with the even when it doesn't amount to full awakening, or awakening into one of the four paths and fruits that the Buddha speaks about. Still, we have insights along the way. We have moments of beauty, and which are encouraging. We recognize that something that we did, which was a little difficult to come to do, had good results, and maybe comprised an act of moral beauty, which you hadn't maybe thought of doing before, or you hadn't expressed your moral commitment in quite that way before, in an act of speech, for instance. Maybe you had never found the words to compliment someone in just the right, truthful way, or to say something compassionate to someone in real need. You hadn't found those kinds of words before, and yet this time you had, and it brings pleasure. And we ought to remind ourselves of these moments where we succeed in that kind of way, because we'd all like to do it again, make a habit of it, wouldn't we? But it's very restorative to the heart and mind for us to take note of things that we do well from time to time. And there is beauty in this. These are the acts of a life, of a moral human being, a person, as we say, on the path, in our path. But we know full and well that you don't have to be Buddhist to be of good ethical character, do we? We recognize that in others, and to recognize that in others is another form of beauty, in a way. To have eyes which are open and alive to the beauty in others, the courage that others have, and maybe bringing me back to watching sports or reading about sports. I mean, that is probably one of the reasons that people deep down like to view sporting events, because they see a kind of they see all of the things that I mentioned, discipline and courage and so forth, but they see it writ large in a way, and expressed physically, obviously. So it's very evident as a physical expression. and so is quite obvious, even if the qualities that brought that athlete to be able to do that are less obvious. But anyway, I suppose the self-help section of bookstores is probably full of athletes who have written about how it is they got to be so good. So yeah, so the Dhamma has these qualities, beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, beautiful in the end. And it's true, I think, I noticed again and again in my own character, I find that it's kind of normal and natural for me to think of the Dhamma in aesthetic terms, because of reasons that I suppose are obvious by now. And looking at the time now, so we're familiar with the notion of merit, yeah. We make merit, and we do so sometimes in very prescribed ways. You know, you offer something to monks, for instance, and nuns. So you offer some food, maybe you feed the monks and nuns. But of course, merit and generosity are just part of life. I mean, parents. Basically, the act of parenting is an act of generosity, because every day little children, and sometimes very tiny children, they require everything that we have to give them, from physical support and kindness, loving attention, obviously, to food and bathing and all the rest of it, and then piano lessons and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just endless. It's almost literally endless what it is that parents offer to their children. So generosity is a merit-making enterprise, and sometimes, because so much effort is involved with something like parenting, we forget to recognize the merit that it's contained, that it comprises. So, and doing so, that is actually taking the time, taking the few minutes in the day that it takes to recognize the effort, the moral effort and beauty of parenting, for example. That effort is very well spent, because we remind ourselves of something that we're doing well. If you're a parent, of, especially of young children at the moment, we remind ourselves that that is an act of kindness, and you could say an act of generosity that we bring to bear on our own experience. And it only good comes from it. We do need to be kind to ourselves. We do need to express metta towards ourselves, and we do need to exercise skill in this regard. Be creative, because it's probably a truism amongst Westerners, at least, that we are pretty hard on ourselves. We're prone to be fairly hard on ourselves. So finding good and truthful and beautiful ways to counteract this rigidity, this small-mindedness, small-heartedness towards ourselves. Finding ways to counteract that is very important, very, very beneficial, very lovely. So merit, yeah, merit is something which is talked about a great deal in Buddhism, maybe a little bit less so in the West. Certainly in the East, I mean, it's a talk, a regular conversation, and people are always rejoicing in the merit that other people or they themselves are making. It's quite a marvel to witness, and I find it's something that. Yeah, I suppose I remind people of now that I'm back in the West, because it's an element of practice in the West which I think it has not been consciously neglected. It's just been neglected. The resource that it offers has been neglected, owing to, generally speaking, owing to the nature of our culture. So we can apply valuable effort by counteracting this with the kind of kindness that and skill which comes out of recognizing our own merit and the merit of others, rejoicing in it. That's called mudita, isn't it? Appreciative joy. And it develops, and here we have a good Thai word, arya sap. It develops what is called noble wealth. This is, I don't know if there's a particular equivalent in Pali for this, but arya, of course, is noble. And sap, I guess, is wealth in Thai. I don't know that particular word, but probably Arya Sap and punya or merit are basically synonymous, and yet Thai monks, teachers will use Arya Sap in a particular way, and it's one of those things that you can count on. I'm thinking right now of my teacher Ajahn Pavaro in Thailand, who would say, you know, Arya Sap, you can't. It's with you. Nothing can destroy it. Floods and fires and windstorms, nothing can destroy. So everything that we know of in life, including our own bodies, can be destroyed and will come to an end, of course. But nothing can destroy Arya Sap. So this noble wealth we bring with us. It remains with us after this particular life. And we bring it into whatever life we have, wherever we find ourselves. It carries us, we carry it with us. It carries us with it, more likely. And so we find it, it becomes a resource. It is a resource. It's a living resource wherever we are in life. Arya Sap. And it's beautiful, isn't it? It's another element of beauty in this practice and way of life. Well, I've let's see now. I've taken us from tennis to Arya Sap, and hopefully there are some things in this that you can find benefit in, and I'll leave this for your